Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Naga Manchetti and Charlie State.
Our headlines today. Dominic Cummings leaves Downing Street for the last time, so what might change at the top of government?
Christmas in the balance, a warning that COVID infection rates need to be low and stay low to avoid a festive lockdown.
Donald Trump speaks in public for the first time since losing the US election and comes close to acknowledging defeat.
This administration will not be going to a lockdown. Hopefully the whatever happens in the future, who knows which administration it will be. I guess time will tell.
Good morning. The Brits are going well at the Masters Golf, and Rory McIlroy recovered from this sinking feeling to stay involved with everything to play for. 2 rounds to go. He's 6 off.
Good morning. It's a mild weekend for all of us, but unfortunately we're going to see some wet and windy weather at times. I'll have all the details coming up shortly.
Good morning. It's Saturday, the 14th of November. Our top story. The Prime Minister is said to want to clear the air and move on after his chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, left Downing Street for the last time following a long-running power struggle.
Mr Cummings, who's been one of the most influential figures in Westminster in recent years, is expected to continue his work from home until he leaves his post in mid-December. Here's more from our political correspondent, Nick Eardley.
Leaving by the front door for the last time, Dominic Cummings, who had been Boris Johnson's most senior and influential aide, but whose time at the heart of government is over. When Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, he turned to his allies from the Brexit referendum. Mr Cummings and his Vote Leave colleagues were brought in to make sure Brexit was delivered and to shake up the way the government worked. But Mr Cummings was deeply controversial, often finding himself in the limelight. In particular, after he refused to apologise after driving to Barnard Castle from London during lockdown.
Sorry I'm late. We agreed that we should go for a short drive to see if I could drive safely.
But it's tensions in here which have proved his downfall, with faction fights in Number 10 bursting into the open in recent days, as different groups fought for influence over the Prime Minister. Boris Johnson's fiancée, Carrie Simons, was one of those who'd raised concerns. But for months, many of Boris Johnson's MPs and even some ministers had been unhappy at the style of government with Mr Cummings in Number 10, and that very few people seemed to have the Prime Minister's ear.
Well, he was always someone who would sort of shake things up. He didn't take things as if just because they've been done that way, that they couldn't be done any other way. And it's always good, I think, to have people who challenge the system and challenge the way things are done. He's obviously been very influential in that way.
Now the Vote Leave era in Number 10 looks to be drawing to a close. It'll be up to the Prime Minister and those left in Downing Street to decide what happens next. Nick Eardley, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's speak now to our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake, who's in Downing Street for us this morning. So, Jonathan, we see the door behind you there. Help us with a little explainer. We have Dominic Cummings emerging yesterday, slightly theatrically, through the door, leaving, you know, in brackets, for the last time with his cardboard box. What's the story that goes behind that?
Morning, Charlie. Well, there are conflicting and colourful accounts about Dominic Cummings' final hours in Downing Street yesterday. We know that there was a meeting between the Prime Minister and Mr Cummings and Lee Cain, the now former Director of Communications here at Number 10, around yesterday lunchtime, at which Boris Johnson was said to want to clear the air and move on. But there are claims at that meeting the Prime Minister accused Lee Cain and Dominic Cummings of briefing against his fiancée, Carrie Simons. Now, that has been denied by another source using a 4-letter word, which I can't repeat on television at this time in the morning. And another in the room described it as a lovely conversation, during which the 3 men reminisced about their achievements together. Now, what all this tells you is that even after an incredibly turbulent week here at Number 10 and the departure of these 2 men, there is still something of a grapple for the definitive version of events, which is the sort of last throes of the power struggle which we've seen play out here in Downing Street over the last week or so. But Dominic Cummings has left for good, bar a bit of working from home between now and Christmas, and it does leave a void that needs to be filled at the heart of Boris Johnson's premiership. He's brought in his longtime aide, Sir Edward Lister, to run things as his chief of staff on an interim basis. But big questions from here on about the nature of Boris Johnson's time in Downing Street, his government from here on, and just how things will be run by Downing Street for the rest of his time here.
Jonathan, thank you.
Scientists advising the government on the coronavirus pandemic are warning that the type of Christmas we'll be able to enjoy hangs in the balance.
Latest figures show the R number, the rate at which the virus is spreading in the UK, has fallen, raising hopes some restrictions could be eased over the festive period. But experts say the situation remains volatile. Simon Jones has this report.
There are just 41 days to go until Christmas, but it's still far from clear what a Christmas in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic will look like. The hope is that the current restrictions on our daily lives will lead to a decline in cases in the coming weeks, reducing the number of people going into hospital and ultimately dying. The R number, the average number of people an infected person passes the virus onto, is currently between 1 and 1.2. Scientists advising the government say if R is well below 1 for some time, there may be greater potential for the loosening of social distancing rules during the festive period. But if R is high, there will be little to no scope for changing things over Christmas. Crucial is what happens when the 4-week lockdown in England comes to an end.
If we can bring incidence lower, it allows us a little bit of wiggle room. But where we need to be really careful is actually when we pull the plug, as it were, on the 2nd of December, if we go back to, say, a tier 1 situation or even lower restrictions, then cases may start to climb rapidly again. So I think where we really need to be careful is that 3-week period from the 2nd of December up until the Christmas period.
In many places, the Christmas lights have already gone up, though in England, non-essential shops must remain closed until the start of next month at the earliest. This week, a meeting was held between the 4 nations of the UK to discuss a joint approach towards Christmas. No firm conclusions were made, but there will be further meetings in the coming weeks.
So hi there, if you could please take this swab and follow posted...
Plans to get students home are already being prepared. As many as possible will be offered rapid result COVID tests before leaving campuses to minimise the risk of the disease being spread. But for many, the ultimate Christmas gift would be the rollout of a vaccine, bringing with it the hope of a return to some sort of normality. Simon Jones, BBC News.
And around 9:10 this morning here on Breakfast, we're going to be joined by the virologist, Dr Chris Smith, and also the epidemiologist, Professor Sian Griffiths. Both are going to take your coronavirus questions.
Yeah, you may have seen before, the way we work this is they are both fantastic experts. Brilliant. And they are very, punter friendly. They will deal with things straight up. They will give you straight answers. So ideally what we do is we get your questions, we put them through to the experts, and we try and get some clarity in a situation that is often quite unclear.
It's like a coronavirus surgery, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's brilliant. Time now, 6:08. Other news to bring you. Donald Trump has spoken publicly for the first time since losing the US presidential election.
At a news conference to talk about the US response to the pandemic, President Trump said he would never impose a lockdown, but implied the next administration might. He's yet to concede the election to Joe Biden, but did acknowledge he might not be in the White House beyond January.
Ideally, we won't go to a lockdown. I will not go. This administration will not be going to a lockdown. Hopefully, whatever happens in the future, who knows which administration it will be. I guess time will tell.
Joined now by our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes. Peter, good to see you. So, what we've been waiting for, I suppose, is to see Donald Trump speaking in public and just wonder, actually, if he could concede defeat. And if we can actually say this is him conceding defeat or just alluding to the fact that he hasn't won.
Well, yes, good morning to you. I don't think he is quite there yet. He is inching towards acknowledging in public that he hasn't won the election, that Joe Biden was the winner, but he isn't there yet. And this was, as you say, a news conference to talk about the coronavirus. First of all, it wasn't much of a news conference because the reporters weren't given any opportunity to ask the president questions. And he just threw out that phrase, talking about the next couple of months and the administration that will be in power after after January, and he just said, well, we'll wait and see. And that's as close as the president is getting. And at the same time, earlier in the day, Joe Biden projected as the winner of the final two outstanding states, Georgia and Arizona. That gets Joe Biden to the number of 306 electoral college votes. So why is that significant? Well, that's exactly the number that President Trump managed to win 4 years ago against Hillary Clinton. The situation has been reversed. And while this news conference was about coronavirus, there wasn't a...
Oh, apologies to our viewers there. Peter Bowes, our Los Angeles correspondent, talking about Donald Trump. And as he was making very clear, this was not a concession, but obviously people keeping a very close eye on the language Donald Trump using since the results came in from the US election.
Other stories for you this morning. Talks on a post-Brexit trade agreement have made less progress in the past week than the EU had hoped for.
An EU source said one of the meetings was short and brutal. One of the UK contingent said big gaps still remain between the two sides, with sticking points around fishing quotas and goods. There are just 7 weeks for any deal to be agreed and ratified before the end of the transition period on January the 1st.
Greggs is to cut more than 800 jobs because of the pandemic.
The bakery chain warns it will not be profitable as a business if sales continue at the rate seen in lockdown.
Many of its shops are in city centres and rely on office workers who are staying at home.
Now, as of last night, more than £37 million had been raised for children in need on what was the 40th anniversary of the fundraiser.
Of course, COVID restrictions meant that there was no live audience and the broadcast on BBC One was a bit shorter than normal.
There was still plenty of fun to be had, though, as David Sillito reports.
Please welcome your hosts, Alex Scott and Chris Ramsey, Mel Gedroych and Stephen Mangan.
It was a stripped-back, socially distanced anniversary for children in need. The live audience was watching on Zoom. In 1980, the total at the end of the night was just over 1 million. 40 years on, Joe Wicks alone got twice that for his 24-hour workout.
3, 2, 1.
A charity single featuring Cher, the Rickshaw Challenge, the familiar children in need ingredients. Of course, this year, people were cycling indoors.
Call me back, Cinderella, nasty girl.
And the live musical performance? No big West End choruses. Instead, Andrew Lloyd Webber on a keyboard, a safe 2 metres from a solo performance by Carrie Hope Fletcher.
When you try your best, but you don't succeed.
But some things were unchanged. The public's generosity. And in a year which has brought new challenges of loneliness, isolation,
We've had success.
and COVID-related hardship, the need for children in need. David Sillito, BBC News.
Of course, so many families going to benefit from the donations there for children in need. As we were showing yesterday, so many families have benefited.
Yeah, the stories of the people who have received money in the past gets you every time, which is why people have been so generous at clearly what is a very challenging time for a lot of people looking at household budgets and all of that stuff. We'll be talking a bit more about children in need, some of the things that went on a bit later in the programme.
Now, though, let's take a look at some of the front pages. Many of the papers are leading with the news of Dominic Cummings' departure from Downing Street. The Eye is reporting that the Prime Minister's team is torn apart by feud, it says, and it quotes the Conservative MPs who say that Mr Johnson should now focus on the coronavirus pandemic and Brexit.
According to the Daily Telegraph, Mr Cummings described the Prime Minister as indecisive and accused him of dithering.
The Yorkshire Post has dedicated its front page to the 13 victims of serial killer Peter Sutcliffe, who died yesterday. The son of his first known victim, Wilmer McCann, son told the paper that the murderers and criminals like the Yorkshire Rippers, so-called Yorkshire Rippers, should not be treated as cult figures.
Yes, and finally, image here, the story we were just reporting a moment ago. After a very different 40th Children in Need last night, the website carries a thank you message to everyone who helped fundraise and donate. You heard the figure just a moment ago, £37 million raised. That's the figure on the night. Money comes in, of course, over a period of time afterwards. But no matter what, it is an extraordinary sum of money. And all goes to those who need it most.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.